This is Kirk Nelson with Brilliant Twisted Skulls with another installment of Chainmail tricks, tips, and ring flips. Today we'll be talking about structural JPL. As you can see here, this is JPL, also known as Jens Pinned Linkage. Today we're using TRL, the Ring Lord rings. These are 18 SWG, standard gauge. And the AR on these is approximately 2.66. Now, it's been suggested that JPL cannot be woven below roughly about 8, but the reality is you can weave JPL down to about 2.66. You can get structural JPL between a range of 2.66 to say 2.75 and still have a fair amount of rigidity. These are the absolute lowest AR you can weave JPL in. Maybe a little bit lower, but like 2.64 maybe, before the rings start to actually spread at the kerf, or with the ring's butt. There's a number of different applications for structural JPL. As you can see, this makes a great just little straight piece of JPL. But here's another application. This is a little heart pendant that I made. It has this section here is woven at that 2.66, 2.7 AR. And then I've modified this section here so that it is rigid in one direction. So it still has that same rigidity as this piece here, but in one direction, but then in the opposite direction, it has a little bit more flexibility. So I increased the AR on this row of rings here, allowing it to have a little bit more of a little bit more flexibility, and thus making this this little heart shape. And you can see that it's a little bit flexible. I mean, it has some flexibility to it, but it still holds its shape really pretty quite well. Now this is all just structurally woven. There's no welds, and if I were to weld this, I could actually make this a little bit more solid. So, well, I could make it fully solid, but anyway, so this is one of the applications I use that for. And then here's another one. I make these little triquetras, which are pretty cool. They're pretty solid. And this is, again, woven in that 2.7 range. 2.775, 2.75 gives you a little bit more flexibility, be able to get these curves. But still, I mean, this is really pretty rigid once you've woven it into this shape, and then connecting it makes it really tight. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go ahead and move forward here, and I'm going to show you how we weave structural JPL. And I'm going to tell you, it's a bugger. It is not easy, and you're going to see how that goes right now. Now, normally, I don't generally open my rings while I weave. I usually do that while I weave. I rarely open and close rings before weaving, but for expediency's sake, I went ahead and closed a ring and then opened a handful of rings so that I could start showing you right away how this works. So we'll go ahead and link these first two rings, and you'll see it's just a standard ring link, 2-ring link, and we're gonna push this over. Now you can actually weave JPL in 2 directions. So it is, you can create a mirrored weave. So I'm going to show you the way I normally do it based on the fact that this is how I weave, and the way I open my rings makes this method a bit more simple than trying to weave it in the opposite direction. So as you can see, we lay the rings. So the first ring is laid down, and then I twist it, the second ring, so that it lays twisted clockwise. So if you're looking at it from the way we're looking in the camera, you can see how that's crossed over. And then the second ring, or the second ring link, so the third ring itself, will go in just like that, just between those two rings. And that'll be your third link. And then what I want to do is I want to pull that around into this nice spiral. And you can see there that each ring is spiraled in that same direction. This ring leaning onto this one leaning onto that one. And this is really important to make sure that you keep that orientation. And I'm going to show you here as we put in this next ring. What you want is you want to sneak it in between, and so that when you're looking at it straight on there, you can see it. Go ahead and close that. That the fourth ring is actually layered on top of the first ring. You see that? See if I can make it so you guys can see that. So it's layered right on top of that first ring. So what we want to do here is that second ring that we wove, the one right down here on the bottom, so number 1 and then number 2, pinch that guy in your fingers. And now this is the standard method of weaving. There's 2 ways to weave. I'm going to try to show you this one because it's really difficult to do this, what I consider the standard method. But we're going to try to do it with this. So that second ring, which is the third ring back, the second ring, third ring back. So here's the first ring, second ring back, and then the third ring back is pinched between my fingers perpendicularly. You see that? And so these 2 rings are just kind of laying there. And if you look really close, you can kind of see, let's see if I can get a little closer, you can kind of see there's a space that's created, a void between that's created by that first ring here and the second ring here, and it's on the left hand side of this third ring that I've got my fingers pinching. So we're going to put that ring in there, and this is going to be really tough to do it this way. Oops. And that's why we call it tricks, tips, and ring flips, because we end up flipping a lot of rings. So let's get this guy back here. So now this is okay. If you end up dropping this is a perfect example. Time to give us so I can show you. It's really simple to get right back on track. So again, you see that those rings, if you put this back in your fingers here, you can see that those rings are still oriented so that they're laid 1, 2, 3. Those are the first 3 rings are in that position, still in that spiral, and that this fourth ring here is now right back on top of that first ring, and we're all good. And we're going to try again to get this ring, this next ring, the 5th ring, right in here. And you can see how much I'm struggling here. And I'm going to show you a simpler way to do this. And I'm going to tell you why it's simpler to do it that way. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that we're just going to go ahead and flip this, because it's way too hard to do it this way. So if I take this around, and so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to pinch that again, that third ring back, which is the second ring we wove, right? And I'm going to flip that around, and that puts that 4th ring on top, now behind the first ring, okay? And then I'm going to spread that right there. I'm going to take this ring, and I'm going to push that in to the space, and that is really tough. That space right there, you can see it, between the second and third ring that we wove. And then we're going to go through the fourth ring, if I can get, trying to look at the camera, make sure I'm in frame and weave at the same time, if I can get this thing. And so this is super tight. So you got to do a little bit of prying there, but you want to make sure that you're doing it in a circular motion. So you're not trying to pull or push. You're trying to slowly hook that in, and you've got to kind of wiggle it sometimes. And so there you can see that I've gotten that in there. And close that up. And so we've got, now what we have is what's considered a stable unit of JPL. This is fully stable, and the great thing about structural JPL, once you've gotten this far, you can't weave it wrong because it won't let you. It's just too tight to go in the wrong way. So you're good once you get to here. But so what you can see now, again, and this is the way I weave all JPL, and this is considered the backwards method. The reason this works is as you look at this, if you look at the structure here, when I'm pushing in here, I'm pushing these two rings apart. When I come this way and I try to hook that in, I'm actually pushing this ring back into this one, back into this ring here. Let me get in frame better. Into this ring. I'm pushing it as I'm pushing that ring. Let's see if I can show you. Get this into, okay, here we go. So as I'm pushing in this way, the reason why that's working so hard against me is because I'm actually pushing on that other ring, that second ring back, and I'm pushing it into the third ring back, tightening that up. Now, when you're weaving normal JPL, which is around an AR of, 2.9 to 2.3, which is kind of the sweet spot for JPL, it's not such a big deal because you can, you're not fighting with tension. And the way this works is that this is woven so tight that you're just creating friction between all those rings. And there's two types of structural weaving, chainmail weaving. There's bound and friction. And so some rings you weave in such a way that it creates a binding so that the ring can't move because it's held up against 3 or 4 other rings, and so it can't move in that direction. But this literally is being bound by friction, which is causing all of the squeezing. It's so tight that it just literally can't move because of the friction. So let's go ahead and close this guy up. And you'll see, once again, we're building that. And so you can see, though, and that's not the perfect ring. You see there's a little bit of deformation to this, to the ring here. And that's just from trying to fight that in. But you can see, though, that there's no gap at the butt, right? Where the ends of the rings butt together. There's no gap there. And that's critical. I don't consider it a successful weave if we've woven it super tight and it's still got it and it has a gap. So, but it's also important when you're weaving JPL at a structural level or any chainmail at a structural level that you make sure that you are getting those rings really tight. And here I have a tendency to, you can kind of see as I go in there. Sometimes I'll put my thumb in on top of that to help push it. But could you hear that little clicking sound? That's literally the weave pushing against that friction, and then having to and then kind of breaking through, and then hitting that other ring. And so things are getting a little tight. But you can see, you can just kind of bring that around. And you can see actually this ring here is getting a little bit. So some of these rings might be a little bit on the low side, but for the most part, they're pretty good. Let's close that up. And so there you have structural JPL. And like I said, there's numerous applications for this. Um, it's really difficult to do, but it's a lot of fun when you finally, when you get to making some really cool pieces. And um, if you have any questions, please leave comments down below. Um, I'd really love it if you liked and subscribed to my channel. And I look forward to seeing you guys again. We'll be back with some more tricks, tips, and ring flips from Brilliant Twisted Skulls. Thank you.